to Replenish, hope that sustains in the midst of adversity. This is a safe place where I have a conversation with special guests to bring encouragement and insight to replenish us in the journey of raising kids from hard places. So whether you're a foster parent, adoptive parent, or kinship, safe family, this conversation is for you. And today, I would just want to invite you to go ahead, and the chat room is open, to go ahead and feel free to chat. Oh, there's Angie's. I just opened mine. She's letting us know she's multitasking. That's why her video's off, which that's great. Multitask away. We're just glad you're here. So anyways, I wanted to go ahead and introduce Katie Edwards. She's our guest today, and thank you, Katie, for being on. Before we get started, let me just read and tell everybody a little bit why you're so amazing and why we have you here today. So Katie's been doing full-time youth ministry for the past 24 years at Saddleback Church in California. She's currently the director of student ministries and pastor of junior high ministry at the Lake Forest campus. She's the author of The Skinny on Discipleship and a contributor to the Download Youth Ministry podcast. She has a passion for teenagers and a passion for equipping and encouraging youth workers and parents of teenagers. Katie lives here in Southern California with her husband, Ron, and her 3 kiddos, Abby, Ella, and Cooper. So Katie, just to get us started, can you tell us just a little bit about what got you started with kids? And I know you're also a foster adoptive parent, so maybe you can tell us a little bit about your family as well.
Cool. Well, it is so great to be with you guys and with fellow foster and adoptive parents. We're just the best exclusive club ever, so it's so great to be with you. I've been married to my husband for 22 years, and we have 3 kids. Abby is our oldest. She's 20, so she's a sophomore in college. And so we're navigating a totally new phase with her. She's our one biological daughter, and then we have Ella, who's 17. We adopted her out of the foster system when she was 7, is when she came to live with us. And then we have Cooper, who is 9, and he came to us at 6 weeks old out of Orangewood, and did the whole reunification thing with his parents, and it didn't work out, so we adopted him when he was 3. We've had 6 foster kids total, wow. So 4 long-term that reunified with their parents, and then we kept 2. We got to adopt 2.
Wow.
Really, really cool.
Wow. Well, thank you.
So, yeah, I'm also a youth pastor, so just my favorite age group, and one that I'm really loving parenting as well, which I know not everybody can say that or feels that way, but I'm really enjoying my teenagers in my home. I have currently all of Gen Z in my home, so 20 to 8, so the bookends of that entire generation, so it's kind of cool to be parenting in that space.
What defines,
my husband teaches, oh yeah, go ahead.
What defines Gen Z? I've lost after Gen X, which
yeah,
what everybody is and how you know.
Yeah, so currently Generation Z would be 20, 21 is the top end of that, and then the lower end is like 9, 10. So that's the current Gen Z. Below 9 and 10, they're starting to call Gen Alpha. So we'll see. They're not quite as developed yet. So
yeah.
Yeah. So my husband teaches 6th grade, so we have just kids coming out of our ears in every corner of our life, which we love. And he's also been a 4th grade teacher. He's taught at his elementary school for about 25 years. So, and he loves that too. So yeah, and then I'm a youth pastor, which again, I love working with teenagers. I think they are just the coolest bunch. And it's fun. I think my journey as a foster parent and as an adoptive parent has really made ministry in the church richer too, just to know a completely different angle that some of our kids are coming from. So I'm so grateful for that in our journey.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's awesome that our leader of our youth has, you know, a broad spectrum. Like you understand this group right here, our struggles and need, and how it's different. I just think that's really neat that you guys are trauma informed. So thank you for that. So, you know, what made me ask you to come on today is we were going to partake in this Refresh conference, which is an annual conference for foster adoptive families and our parents, caretakers. And you were one of the speakers, and I did not know that until I registered. And your workshop is on basically navigating this whole screen time thing. You know, our kids have been raised in a different generation than us, this Gen X or Gen Zs, you know, they're the ones who were raised with all this technology, and you just have a wealth of experience and information that we can glean from you. So I'm just going to kind of turn it over to you, and you can share some of your insights with us. And Max looks like he just threw up a poll there, which you can, you guys can all answer. Is just asking, yeah, just some different things. Feel free to answer that so we can all get a feel of what we're doing. But yeah, Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So great. Well, I was telling Tristan earlier, I'm not an expert in technology, so I hope that's not a letdown for you. But I do. We have learned some things along the way, and are seeing things in culture that I hope will be an encouragement to you. But I want to start up by saying that you, as the parent, know best. So whatever you hear, or I would just say that you always know best. So I will always default to that. Parents just know their kids the best. But let me just talk about Generation Z for just a little bit, and this term digital native. And really this generation of kids that we're parenting right now are being born into a digital time. So there's no other generation that's like them. That can either be a really scary thing or a really exciting thing. And I'm hoping that some of the things that we talk about today will actually excite you when it comes to our kids and technology versus just scare the crud out of you, which is usually where we're coming from as parents. So they are digital natives, which means that our kids are born into a digital time where they really know no difference. So our kids aren't digitally tech savvy, they're actually tech dependent. And that's not a negative thing, it's just a fact. Every place and space that they go to has digital technology attached to it. It's funny, even walking into a restaurant that has a digital Coke machine that you're pressing buttons to actually get your Coke. You know, for us as, you know, even older millennials or Gen X or boomers, we remember a time where everything was not digital, or the transition space of that, but our kids don't know that space. And that's kind of the difference between us, which is, like I said, it's not a bad thing, but it's a really important thing to keep in mind, of the fact that our kids are being born into this culture and they are digital natives. I say that because everything in their life from here on out is going to have a digital spin. So helping our kids navigate the digital space, thrive in the digital space, be healthy in the digital space, be social in the digital space, it really is going to become more about the mindset shift of how do we help our kids thrive in technology versus putting them in bubble wrap and not allowing them to experience everything. Like anything that our kids hit, there's going to be pitfalls. There are obvious evils about technology that exist. There are spaces that are unhealthy. There are spaces that we don't want our kids to go into. But just like life, teaching them to fail and succeed, even in the digital space, is going to become crucial for their survival. Because from here on out, anything that they experience is going to be in this digital culture. So what I want to talk to you about today is just, what does it look like to think through an offense and a defense when it comes to digital technology and the digital space with your kids? Because I do think there is a defense for us to play as parents, but also a defense to teach our kids so that they know how to play defense from here on out in the digital space. And then an offense, which is what it looks like to thrive, to find the positive spaces, to find authentic relationships, which we're experiencing more than ever. What does it look like for it to be this really offensive, positive thing in our kids' lives? So I want to just break it down into those two little pieces and just give you a few things to think about today. This is such a broad category, and Tristan said, 25 minutes, so we'll try to get as much in as possible. Yeah. So a couple things about Gen Z right now, about the current, kind of this current generation of younger kids to understand is culturally, they're the most overwhelmed. So if you look at percentages of students, 69% of kids ages 9 to 17 would say they're overwhelmed. So that's something to keep in mind. They're not just overwhelmed with schedule, they're also overwhelmed with all the things that kind of make up their space, including social media and some of those things that also create overwhelming feelings. They are the loneliest generation, at least that's how they're being reported on right now. 69% of kids 12 to 17 would say they are lonely and in a lonely season. Anxiety, depression, some of those things connected to technology, those percentages are on the rise, and those are things to be aware of about Generation Z. Loneliness, overwhelmed, anxiety, those are three things that every single kid will experience. But our kiddos who have had some layers of trauma in there are also going to experience things in a nuanced way that's a little bit different than maybe another kid who's in a more typical situation. And all of these things are connected to technology or the digital space in some way, shape, or form. So it's important to kind of keep that in mind. So defense, what does that look like? How do we help them recognize and navigate emotions tied to FOMO, comparison, fear, and self-worth? Those are all things that we as parents want to help be on the defense of, but then also help our kids be on the defense or have a defense for. And even a kid as young as 5 years old could struggle with comparison, fear, FOMO, and self-worth. That's not something that's just for teenagers. Our younger kids who are in the digital space are experiencing emotions that they're unaware of how to put legs to. Again, in all of our kids, we're constantly helping them put names to their emotions. And so in the digital space, it's just as important. I think in the defense too, how do we help them connect in a way that helps foster authentic relationships? Authentic relationships are possible in the digital space. This is evidence of that, right? Communities coming together for authentic purposes. For our kids, they need to be taught about what do those authentic relationships look like, and when do we need a defense against relationships that are not authentic, that are toxic, that might be influencing relationships that are leading our kids towards something that's not good for them. So what does it look like to have defense up for relationships, but create ones that are authentic? How do we as parents protect them and show them some of the pitfalls, some of the danger zones of the digital space without creating a negative perspective or perception of the digital space? I think that's an important thing. Not all technology is evil. Not every part of the digital space is a terrible thing. And for this generation of kids, it's going to be really important that we message things in that way as parents, because they won't know any other space. They won't be able to survive without knowing how to survive the digital space. So what does it look like to help them to begin to see things that might not be the healthiest road, influencer accounts that might not be the best ones to follow, things like that. And how do we create open lanes of ongoing conversation? So what does it look like in the defense space to create open lanes of communication with our kids? I think this is a big piece of offense and defense of what ongoing conversation looks like. If your kid wanders into something that isn't good for them, is unhealthy, you want to be the first person that they run to tell. So what does it look like to, in our own relationships with our kids, have levels of trust built so that if they are exposed to pornography accidentally or out of curiosity, if they do stumble upon someone's account who is targeting them, who is attacking them or bullying them, how do we help them identify some of those things, but then also, how do we create an open lane for them to come to us in conversation? So we want to be the first ones they come to, even if the subject matter is uncomfortable or we're sad or we're scared about something that they've seen. Man, if they run to us first, that level of trust is going to be able to help us have ongoing conversation in those lanes, which we'll come back to. The offense part is, the cool part about our kids right now is this generation is really entrepreneurial and they're really individualistic. They care a ton about doing significant things, doing things that matter. They're really creative by nature. They want to do things that use their unique gifts. So all over social media, YouTube, and places like that, we see kids using their gifts like never before. So what does it look like as a parent to be in that space, to not only motivate them to be in that space and encourage them, but to pour gasoline on passions that could potentially do significant things in our culture? What does it look like to enjoy technology together? So to be in the digital space together and to enjoy some of the things that are there for us to enjoy. Again, how do we help them use technology as a healthy social tool? So I think that's something to chat through. And then how do we keep open lines of communication and conversation, again, with our kids in this space? Something that I think really strikes me about the current generation of kids, and just even as I parent my own kids, is I think this is a space that we're going to see this generation of kids be world changers, do really, really incredible things. And again, if we can get them into a healthy place in the digital space, they're going to use technology undoubtedly to do that. They're going to use the digital space to launch platforms and ministries and significant spaces to advocate and bring justice about. So there's a really exciting piece to our kids today with who they are naturally wired to be, and the digital space has contributed to that. They have a wealth of knowledge at their fingertips, which is not always the healthiest thing, but also in that wealth of knowledge, they've been shaped to do things that matter. So imagine that for your kids of what could be in the digital space, relationship-wise and beyond that. So
Katie,
just want to take a minute to kind of dive into, yeah.
I just love even like what you're saying, like just hearing you kind of say the things that you have just help me kind of go. I tend to sometimes think of the technology more as the like necessary evil, you know? And so hearing you say that this is the way they're raised and they are not just technologically savvy, but you said they're technologically dependent, is what you said. And then you kind of broke that down and it makes sense. And I just like that you are framing it in that way for us to not be scared or turned off or try to limit in a certain way, but to try to, I just hear you saying like, try to help them, you know, navigate this. I don't know, something in the way you were sharing that just changed my even perspective a little bit. So I appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about how we go about doing that, how we build even that trust. And because I know some of us have on this call have struggled with us not being the first for the kids to tell, and us and our kids even not being aware or even drawn to sometimes that the negativity. So yeah, thank you for what you're sharing. It's so valuable and needed.
For sure. It is a little bit of a mindset shift as a parent, and honestly, as I'm my oldest being in college now, I probably have some hindsight knowledge that I'm using on my 9-year-old, poor guy. So, you know, there's some things I think that I've learned with her. It's amazing how quickly your kids become adults and just turn that corner. And I think that really shifted my mindset of, as I'm looking down the barrel of 18 with my kids and sending them off to college, how am I sending them off to be prepared, especially in this space? Because this space is such a large percentage of the space that they live in and that the world and culture creates around them. The mindset shift of how can we help them navigate, thrive, that isn't where I began as a parent, but I think it's a little bit more where I'm living now. I have a 17-and-a-half-year-old who, you know, is gonna be 18 soon. I have a 20-year-old, and they are gonna have to figure out a whole lot more without us than they are with us. And so there is a shift there. You know, when our kids developmentally turn 11 or 12, that's when we start raising them to be adults. And so in the space of technology, I think, you know, really 10, 11 is where you're thinking through the defense and offense of technology in the digital space. Okay, so let's dive in just a little bit on the defense part. So setting our kids up to win with technology. I think a couple things to think with a good defense is it is important to know, especially depending on the age of your kids. The younger they are, obviously, the more parental controls and filters and things that you want to infuse into your home and onto their devices. So I think that's an important thing to think through. Again, when they turn 11 or 12, that's the turning point where I think it begins to be important to build trust with our kids. And so that middle school age range is really where kind of the seeds of trust are planted with technology. And so to me, your middle school years are your most like seed planting, sponge soaking type of years. If you have older kids, it's not too late, but I think that's a really critical time. The younger your kids are, there's all sorts of great filters out there. And, you know, as parents, we share all of those things. You know, a couple things I would think through with just thinking through tools to help, you know, as parents create a defense for our kids. Open DNS is something that is, you would control things in your homes on a router level. You might be familiar with that. It's free. It's not connected to a device, it's connected to your home. So it's something that you can kind of filter in your home. But then there's all sorts of apps that help control device and put parental controls on those things. Again, as your kids grow up, it's really important to begin to build trust through allowing them to teach themselves to filter, to teach themselves to be choosy. And so you might loosen those things up as you go. My 17-year-old and my 20-year-old, right now, we don't have any parental controls or filters or anything. Obviously, for my 20-year-old, she is a super adult. But by the end of high school, we wanted to kind of wean them off so that they were making decisions for themselves. Now, the risky part about that is, as a parent, you're watching your kids sometimes not make great choices, which is really hard. At the same time, the hope would be that those conversation lanes are open so that we can talk about why those choices are good or not good. So obviously a defense, there's tons of great filters out there. There's tons of great things around parental control. But, you know, I would just kind of think through what age and phase your kid is in. And as they grow up, what does it look like to loosen up and to help them kind of be in the real world of the digital space? I think another thing about the defense is no kid needs unlimited data. So just thinking through the data they have on their phone, and you want them to think about it as much as you're thinking about it. I think too, a good defense is having your kid, as they get a little bit older, have some buy-in with their technology. You know, that comes in later with data and having them pay for stuff and things like that. It's really easy these days to monitor, you know, app downloads and app store activities. So something that contributes to a defense is make sure that, you know, your kids are connected to your account when it comes to spending any kind of money, app downloads, you know, that kind of thing. That feels pretty, you know, pretty easy. I would say another thing that contributes to defense is nothing good happens in private. So with thinking through our kids, what does it look like to have technology in the family space versus the bedroom space or behind a closed doors? Typically, teenagers that I work with that stumble and struggle a ton are struggling behind a closed door. So a lot of kids that I'm counseling about porn or counseling about unhealthy relationships, it's really tricky for a kid to follow the lanes of curiosity or to stay on something like that when their parents are sitting next to them on the couch. So what does it look like to have technology in common spaces, or to give, you know, kids spaces that they can jump into that are not too far from you, because a whole lot of things don't happen in the public space. So what does that look like? That, I think that's something that contributes to a good defense, no matter how old your kids are. I
Katie,
think, yeah.
when you say that about not having the technology in private places, how does that work with like phones? I mean, I get computers or things like that, but are you suggesting even like our kids don't have their phones in their rooms and that kind of a thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously, again, as they get older, those are maybe privileges and things that you want to help them navigate.
Yeah.
I think, you know, in the younger high school years and middle school years, they don't necessarily need to have their phone in their room, you know,
Yeah.
they don't necessarily need to be in private. I don't want to like creep on my kids' conversations. I want them to feel like they can have their own relationships as they grow up. At the same time, you know, for us, we've always had everybody just leave their phones downstairs, and
Mm-hmm.
so there isn't any technology in the bedroom. Now, I'm not saying that in our family our kids haven't struggled in this digital space. They have, but I think that as I work with teenagers as a youth pastor, the space where our kids have a hard time navigating things is when they're all on their own. I think when they're in a space with other people, adults, I think they don't walk down quite as many rabbit trails as they might on their own. Curiosity is a really powerful thing for our kids. And
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of stuff in there that lures them in that is not necessarily their fault that they follow. I think they're just
Right.
curious, you know, it's not a negative thing. But I think for them to be curious in a space that feels like there's some accountability in it, I definitely think it helps. It's not an answer or a problem solved situation,
Yeah.
but I think it also is something that contributes to conversation. If my kids see something and they're across the room and I notice their facial expression, I might be able to ask, hey, did you just see something weird? Yeah, I did. I saw this weird thing on so-and-so's Instagram. It was kind of a weird thing, you know? So I think there's something accountability wise. I think there's something that helps our kids. Again, this would be a parental defensive move. You know, it helps our kids just be in the accountable space. A phone in a bedroom, you know, I go to bed at 10 or 11 at night, and my kid could be on her phone until 2 or 3 a.m. So it's really easy for her to just socially, again, walk down a rabbit trail, not even meaning to do anything negative. But
Right.
at the same point, is that the healthiest thing for her? So that might be something where as a parent, you're like, hey, I'm going to help you create this defense by giving you this boundary. Hey, downstairs, you know, there's a couple places for you to pop into to have a private conversation, but even a private conversation when mom or dad is not too far away has some boundaries to it, has some accountability that's attached.
Yeah.
It's not a
Yeah.
perfect system, but it's definitely something that just helps create a little bit of an element of defense.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking through where our kids are on technology and where they interface in the digital space is something to train them on. You know, it's something to talk through with them. Time that they spend, you know, it's not so much a matter of screen time, it's a little bit more of a matter of what does it look like to disconnect and connect. Where do you connect in a healthy way, and where can you disconnect? It helps create a little bit of a boundary. So I think with our kids, kind of help them navigate. I don't even think most of the time they're meaning to do anything, like I said, or stumble into things, but things have a way of catching hold of them in that space. And I think it can unravel a little quicker when the doors close. So just something to be thoughtful about. most filters fail eventually, and most of our kids are smarter than the filters that are being built right now. And that's part of that digital natives piece, is there's a back door to everything, and our kids are really smart. And it's usually easy to get around those things. That's why I would say, think through what it looks like to evolve filters and parental controls over time. What does it look like to slowly release them from those things? So A, they're not getting into a situation where they're disobeying you or not following your rules. You're over time building trust by relieving some of those things as they go. Again, most filters have a back door that our kids can find pretty quickly. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about defense. And I think another defense piece is check in rather than check up. So this would be another kind of like build trust piece. There's a difference in my tone as a parent when I'm checking up on my kids versus when I'm checking in with my kids, especially with my middle daughter, who in her journey in the foster system went through the most trauma. And so my relationship with her is still fragile to this day after 10 years of really of the trust piece. And I'm sure you guys experience that with your foster kids and your adoptive kids. The tone of checking in rather than checking up is a tone that says, I think you're up to something and you're not doing something right or bad or whatever. Checking in is, hey, what's happening with you, or what's going on, or how is this going? It's a little bit of a different tone that I think helps strengthen trust. I just want to check in with you on your social media. How's that going? You know, you just got a Snapchat a month ago, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about what have you noticed about it that you love? What's been hard? I just think there's a little bit of a difference between checking in and checking up, but you want to check in. And I think that's part of a defense, is checking in with our kids. The questions that you raise are questions that they could learn to raise for themselves. So things that might concern you or that you might check in on are actually training them to ask those same questions. So the things that concern you can become things that also concern them, depending on the tone of voice that you use. And I mean, you guys are definitely not new to freaking out on the inside versus on the outside, being calm. And I think the checking in piece is, sometimes I hear that my kids are doing something that I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm kind of freaking out about that. On the outside, my demeanor, I really try to stay calm and have more of that check in versus check up. So I think that helps with defense. And also in the check-in questions, really being thoughtful about those questions, because again, your kids can adopt those as questions they'll ask for themselves to kind of create defense. So those are just like a couple of things that I think, you know, obviously filters, privacy, data, those are all things that kind of help us build a defense. There also should be things that you let your kids on so they can kind of help, you know, create a defense for themselves as they go, questions that they should continue to ask. The offense piece, I think of just a couple things to help create a great offense. Just thinking through using technology together. So where can you have fun in the digital space together? Fun is a universal tool for our kids, and sometimes people think fun is not a powerful thing, but fun with your kids is a really powerful thing that actually relaxes them. And this is something that helps build trust for future conversations. So where can you have fun? Can you play games together? Can you have a family tournament? Find a fun app, you know, Wordscapes, or even old things like Temple Run, have a family tournament going, or things like that that can help you interact with some of the apps that they're using, the games that they're using, the fun stuff, because the fun stuff is a place where trust is built. Fun leads to trust, trust leads to depth. So if you want deep conversations, fun is going to be a great tool that's actually going to build trust with your kids. And it's in that space that they end up telling you things that you're like, oh my gosh, we're playing Temple Run and here we are having this great conversation. So it's incredible what fun can do. So don't discount that. It's a huge offensive piece that just gets you guys comfortable together as a family in the digital space. So what could that be? I think learning together. If you have older kids, if you have teenagers, ask your kids to show you things, to show you, you know, how to build things in Minecraft, which might sound crazy. But my husband leads a life group of college guys. They built a Taco Bell inside Minecraft in the digital space to meet at, which I know sounds like the nerdiest thing ever. But it's funny how technology has created this community space. So as a family, what does it look like to have your kids teach you some fun stuff like that, where you could build your family living room, and no matter where you are in Minecraft, you guys could come together and meet in the digital living room. So there's all sorts of fun pieces of technology, and your kids know a lot about those spaces. What does it look like to utilize those spaces? Any teenager loves looking like the expert. If you can give them the space to feel like an expert in your life and teach you something. Also fifth graders are by far the most confident people on the planet. They could run the world because they are the oldest concrete thinkers on the planet. They only see things in black and white, so they're so confident. So if you have a fifth grader, ask them to teach you everything because they know everything. But what does it look like to ask your kids, hey, show me this, show me that new app, hey, show me how that works, show me how Instagram works, Snap works, whatever. You might already know, but just by asking is a trust builder with your kids. And it's an offensive piece that brings you into their space. Show me how you're interacting with, tell me about. Show me and tell me about are probably two of the most powerful phrases with your kids. Tell me about this, show me this, because it's this invitational, they're these invitational phrases that just naturally invite you into their world. Tell me about why you're struggling right now. Tell me about, show me your favorite picture on your social media. Show me your favorite picture that you took this week. Show me what you're doing in your classroom on Google Classroom, or those types of things. Tell me about, show me are two huge trust building statements with our kids, especially in the digital space. Again, those are offensive phrases that help us to get invited into a space that we really want to be in and help them navigate. I think through another offensive piece is just think through how many social apps they can navigate. Maybe start with one and go from there. A lot of students today, a lot of teenagers in my space are on every social app possible. There are a few where socially it really feels important to be in those spaces because kids get left out, FOMO, comparison, all those kind of things exist. I would just talk through that with your kids of like, hey, how many social apps? Let's choose one, let's choose two, and let's navigate those together. I think that's a space to make a decision together as parent and kid of what those are going to be. It's really hard to manage more than 2 or 3 social apps, but most teenagers today they're managing 5, 6, 7 social apps. So what does it look like to be intentional in that area and to explain why, or to have a conversation of why would it be good to only limit to 1 or 2 potentially? So that's something to think through. A family group chat. A text family group chat is a powerful thing. It is a powerful offense in the digital space. Having you all in a texting group chat that is playful and fun, informative, whatever that can be, sharing things back and forth. But I think that's a great way to be in the digital space together. Texting, if your kids don't have a smartphone, typically they can still be in a group chat. So thinking of those things ahead of time. I think in all of these offensive spaces are where you can build the trust. And building the trust is what's going to open up the lines of communication with your kids. Again, the checking in piece is huge for conversation, and the fun will be huge for conversation. Those 2 pieces, and the show me and the tell me about, are going to be really good lanes for conversation. So be thinking about those pieces. Also, again, I think as parents, really mastering the freak out on the inside, be calm on the outside. That is really going to decide how you respond when your kid tells you anything about the digital space. How you respond is going to decide whether or not a second conversation is going to happen. So it's going to decide for you. If you come to your kid and they say, I saw this thing, or I went onto this website, if our first response is our own fear being expressed, anger, whatever that might be, it has the potential to shut our kids down and not want to tell us things. And we probably remember that with our own parents, right? Telling our parents things, and then you thinking in your mind, I will never tell my mom anything again because she freaked out so hardcore in this space. So what does it look like to really be mindful of that as a parent? Because again, that's going to lead to trust and conversation. It's not easy to control your face. I've lost it as a parent, definitely in my journey. However, I think how in that space, how I respond to how my kids are navigating things really set up future conversations. So be thoughtful about that if you can, and think that through. I know we're kind of running out of time, so just a couple positives about technology with your kid. Finding spaces that kindness, justice, service, as you come across things, interacting in some of those spaces with your kids in the digital space, I think is really formative. So right now there's tons of good news accounts and things like that to follow. Those are great things to pass back and forth as a family. The things that are putting things into your kids' lens that is positive, that's pointing them to Christ, that's pointing them to service, that's pointing them towards kindness and loving others. What does it look like to embrace some of those things in the digital space and bring those things into the lens of our kids, or to be in conversation about those things? Those are really cool ways to, some of the positives of technology. And I think just as a parent, just, thinking through constant questions to ask. Again, you know your kid better than anybody. And so I would just say, what do you really care about? Know the answer to that question. I really care about making sure my kid doesn't have too many things or whatever. Know the answer to that question, what you care about the most, because you can't care about every single thing. You'll go crazy, you and your kids. So what are the things you really care about as a parent that you want to make sure we've got defense here, we've got offense here, and then navigate the rest together. I think too, just what kind of dialogue are you having with them about the digital space and how often? So if your kids are engaged in social media, if they're engaged in the digital space daily, then there's probably some sort of daily check-in in the digital space or about the digital space. It might be the easiest, hey, did you play any fun games today? That's a check-in type question. But if they're in the digital space, which as Gen Z, they are almost daily, what does it look like to check in daily with different types of questions that open up conversation? So just thinking through how often I'm having that dialogue. The more practice you have dialoguing with your kids about it, the more they'll be in practice to come to you. And one last thing I will close on is, what does it look like to create a team around your kids? So I asked my older girls, hey, who are people who could be on your team? And what I mean by that are, who are some people that you can go to if you can't come to us? And so we kind of created a team of people that I know if my kids go to these people, they are wired, similar beliefs, those types of things. But I know that my kids aren't going to talk to me about everything. They're just not. And it's not fair to have that expectation of them. But I also want to make sure that we together as a family are helping them make a decision for who maybe a couple of really great adults in their life could be, that they could go to if for some reason they can't come to me. So each of my girls chose 2 other women, and they each chose, a guy. And my husband and I know these people, but we've also said, hey, if our kids come to you, guide them, point them to Christ, love them, listen to them. We don't need to know what you talk about and something that feels, next level, or they're going to be hurt or whatever. But in the digital space, what does it look like to have a couple of other go-to people that if your kids struggle with something, if they stumble upon something, if they're feeling attacked, if they're feeling something and they can't come to you, who could be 2 other really healthy adults that they could go to? So what does it look like to create a team in the digital space with your kids that they could lean on if it's not you. I'm sad when it's not me. You know, I want it to be me. You know, I do, but I also know that's not realistic. Our kids need more than us to pour into them. So who are some people that can partner with you as parents to help direct and point your kids to healthy places? So yeah, sorry, that was like a whole lot of stuff in like a little time, but yeah, I think just coming down to thinking through as a family, what are going to be some of the defensive pieces that you put into place, and train your kids to create a defense for themselves, and offensive places that you can build trust and open up lines of communication. So yeah.
Katie, that was awesome. I appreciate it. It was not kind of where I was thought initially it was, but I think it was even better in that I took a lot of notes because I'm a note taker. But I love it how you kind of then recapped like the 3 things, you know, like checking in with our kids specifically about their digital world, whatever that may be. And I can see that for me, like that is even going to be a little bit of work, you know, that's a new thing. So it's going to be trying to figure out what kind of questions work for them and help them open up about that. And then also fun, which I'd like to ask you a little bit more about because I've heard that you're an expert at having fun with technology. And I know I have a good friend who's in the junior high ministry, and she tells me you guys do all kinds of fun stuff there. And then I also love the last one that you, or the third one was show me and tell me, or teach me and tell me. So I just love that, you know, but I wanted to get back to the fun because, you know, with foster adopt kids, we're all about connection. And I don't know, I think when they're younger, it's kind of easier to connect with technology with them because you're watching you're kind of helping them connect. But what does that look like? Can you give us some specifics, like
Sure.
about how to have fun? Like what kind of things in your family do you do besides the Minecraft? I get that one. That's a
Yeah.
whole other level for me.
Yes. Yeah.
But just maybe some fun like games or apps or different. You're so creative in the way you use technology with your youth ministry volunteers and students.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you know, there's all different kinds of, there's so much out there. So, you know, if you have little guys, drawing and Pictionary and fun things like that with your little ones are so fun. I would choose, yeah, if there is an app that you all download and create like a little bit of a family tournament or something. So even something like Angry Birds, which is kind of an older game, or finding something like Words with Friends or Wordscapes, things like that, that you can kind of compete against each other. Some stuff you can compete online. There's a whole bunch of game apps that you can compete together. And I would just say those are just fun things that create banter and conversation, smack talking and things like that, which is not a bad thing. That's really,
Yeah.
I realize it can go bad fast in a house full of kids for sure. But I think just like exploring with your kids, like, hey, let's pick a game that we're all gonna play. High score at the end of the week gets to pick where, you know, where we go out for dinner or something like that. You know, I think there's some like things like that that you can do. You know, there's all sorts of, you know, there's all sorts of educational stuff too. So even like in the school space, like, hey, let's do a race to do your math facts, you know, if you have little guys, things like that. I think with teenagers, playing around with filters, having fun with some of things on Instagram or Snap or some of those things. Again, show me how that works. And I mean, our kids love making us look ridiculous. So if you can let them take ridiculous pictures of you and things like that in some of those spaces, those are super fun things. So I think, again, following some of the fun accounts. So one of the things in this quarantine, my girls have loved, we've loved watching John Krasinski's Good News Network. So even a few YouTube shows that you might both all watch together could be really fun. There's a lot of really fun YouTube shows out there that are really positive and really fun and funny. So what does it look like to just look forward to watching some of those things together? I didn't realize that John Krasinski had, thrown a prom on over Instagram this last weekend. My girls were like, "Mom, you missed this. We have to go back and rewatch it." So it was just this fun YouTube that we've been having fun watching together. And when a new one comes out, we text each other because we're so excited. So what are some things that you can just find together that could be cool things to look forward to, cool things to watch together, cool games to play, necessarily wild and crazy. Sometimes it's just things you enjoy together.
I love it.
We have a subscription to Masterclass, which sounds super dorky, but it is super cool. And there's a couple of like cooking tutorials. So we're watching cooking shows on YouTube. Yesterday we made whipped coffee together in the kitchen because it's on, YouTube, and it's so fun. And it was disgusting, but we had a great time making it. I think some of those things that you pick up and you say, oh my gosh, let's try to make that whipped coffee recipe that's all over TikTok.
Yeah.
So I think it's just paying attention to some of the things that they connect with, some of the things that you see, and then creating some space to enjoy. It doesn't have to be crazy, and it doesn't have to be games. We had a great time trying to make whipped coffee in the kitchen yesterday. So but that was because we saw it on someone's Instagram account.
Yeah.
So what does it look like to just pay attention and maybe bring those things into your space?
I love that. I appreciate that. I know my son loves, there's a show, I think Linda on this call told us about it. It's called Perfect Dude. And that's kind of a clean, fun, goofy boy show, that they're young men, but they're like teenage goofballness. But I love that. And I love the idea of doing a family game online. We're big on games and we're big on rousing each other and stuff, but we have never really done it with technology. We just do the, old school stuff. And I like the idea of what you said, having that app and then the highest score gets something. Like, I wouldn't think of that because I'm not yet creative in this technology world. So I just love those examples. Appreciate that. So we're about done, but I do have 3 questions for you. They're the way I tend to like to end every show. And the first one is, what brings you joy?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is a tough season to kind of answer that question.
I know, right?
I would say the thing that brings me the most joy, honestly, is I really do love being around our table. So I do love to cook. It's kind of a therapeutic thing for me. And so then to cook for people. And this season, I've been trying to once a week cook for another family and drop that off because I love it. I was raised, my grandma and my mom are both really awesome cooks. And so I was in the kitchen a ton with them growing up. So for me, that's just a happy space to create happy things to give to hopefully happy people. So I love that. Time, I love the gift of time. So I'm a quality time person. So quality time with anyone is a joyful thing. It's very life-giving. So yeah.
I love it. I love those answers. Thank you. And then if you could say one thing to your younger self, what would it be?
I think if I could say one thing to my younger self, it probably would be comparison will always steal your joy.
That's so true. Good.
I think in every phase of my life, and as a parent, as a foster parent too, and as an adoptive parent, everybody does it a little bit differently. And it's really hard to not look at the way someone else is doing it and make you think that you're doing it wrong, or you're not doing it good enough, or you're falling short. And I just think anytime I fall into a comparison trap, I lose. So my younger self did that quite a bit, even as a younger parent. So I think as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little bit more comfortable to not go down that road, not to compare myself, to learn from others. huge. You know, I think to learn, but to not allow that to make you feel like you're falling short if you don't adopt the way someone else is doing it. So yeah, I think that would be, do less of that is what I would tell my young self.
Yes.
Do less comparing. You're okay. You were made to be you, and that's a good thing. So yeah.
Yeah, that's such a long lesson. It takes such a long time to learn that lesson in life, you know? And I even think
Sure.
there's an aspect of that in our foster adopt community that you just naturally compare. If someone's struggling more with their relationship with their child, you think of it as a reflection on you and maybe what you are not doing right, or, you know, I think there's some of that. So I love the idea that you're saying, like, just let go of that, you know, and it steals your joy. Thank you for that. And then the last one
It really
is,
does.
you know, what foster adoption myth would you like to just blow up right now? You have fostered for a while and you have adopted, and I know you've probably heard a lot being in youth ministry from parents and kids, and have a few annoying
Yeah.
myths that you know that just irk you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, gosh, I think probably the first thing is that you can have a big impact in one season. So I think early on in fostering and adopting, we had a long game, wanting adoption to be the end result.
Mm.
And I think the perspective of big impact can happen in a small season is a really, I think sometimes we think we have to become their parent in order to have long-term impact, or if it ends in adoption, then we can have, you know, truly, you know, the shaping parts of that. But in my ministry and as a foster parent, I think really big things can happen in a season. A teacher, a coach, a foster parent who interfaces with a kid for a year, 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, and then they reunify, or, you know, they move on, or whatever that looks like. The impact that happens in that season can be just instrumental, can put kids on a trajectory towards Christ, can put kids on a trajectory towards long-term health. Big things can happen in a small season. And I think that was a hard thing for me to wrap my mind around as a foster parent. I thought it needed to be a certain way in order for it to be long-term impact. But I see kids come through my ministry in junior high for 2 years, and in that 2 years, life change happens. You know, I see a kid who is in a class with a teacher who inspires and encourages, and they are changed forever by that. I think the same is true in the foster system. Like, kids can come into our home for a season and just experience incredible impact and life change, even if they don't get to stay with us forever. So I think that is an important, I think to piggyback on that too would be the impact that we can have on birth parents, social workers, anybody that we come into contact with. That impact can be just as significant. It was really hard early on in fostering to not feel like I was versus everybody else, like it was our family versus the system or whatever. And I'm really glad God spun that perspective of, hey, you have such an opportunity in this season to encourage anybody you talk to, be a light to anybody you talk to. We had a lot of tired social workers schlep into our living room, you know, and they would just plop down on the couch, and man, it was just such an opportunity to say, you know, how are you? To smile, to be warmth, to be all those things. So I think for our kids, for sure, a short season, but I think even in a short season, the impact can be exponential in birth parents' lives. We had a couple sets of birth parents that we worked with that honestly, at the end, it felt like, wow, this was an incredible journey with them as well as with their kids. So not every case was like that for us, but, you know, I think just that perspective of anybody we come in contact with, short season or long season, there could be major impact.
I love that. Wow. That's great. I appreciate you coming on the show today. I just have a few quick announcements before we wrap things up. there is um, a connection support group that is happening on Wednesdays. My husband will put in the how to get to that in the chat room if you're interested in joining the online study. And also, if you live locally here in Southern California, feel free to email us too. We'll get you plugged into a support group if you're not. We're doing weekly Zoom calls. And then I just wanted to let you know too, next week we're going to have Deborah Gray. She's a licensed social worker who specializes in children's attachment, grief, and trauma issues. So we're going to be talking to her a little bit about that, about trauma, and also about professionals, like how to choose them, who they all are. There's neuropsychology, there's so many different things like that. She's going to clarify that for us. And then May 5th, we're going to have Melissa Corkum. She's a parent coach from the Adoption Connection podcast. And the following week, Lisa Quayles, and she's also from the Adoption Connection podcast, and she has a new book coming out, The Connected Parent, with Karen Purvis. So I just wanted to also invite you all to stay on for the after party. Katie's going to go ahead and tend to her family and the rest of her life. But if you want to stick around and connect, just chat about what we heard or prayer or whatever, I'm going to stay on for another half an hour. So anyways, thank you, Katie, for coming on to Replenish. We appreciate your time and value your contribution. And thank you all who called into this week's Zoom. I pray that you, all of you who are struggling during this time, feel replenished. And don't forget to join us in our private Facebook group, Safe, Precious, and Heard, where you can continue to get resources. And we'll be talking more about what Katie shared here today. And I'll be asking everybody to give us their resources for fun games and how they use technology. So be sure to check that out. And also, until the next time, I just wanted to quote one of my favorite people, Elizabeth Stipey, who says, "There's no such thing as a perfect parent, only a growing parent." So thank you guys, and thanks, Katie. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you guys.
Thank you.